I just want to follow up on the comments of my friend, our chairman from Wyoming, and note that Scott Pruitt responded to more questions than anyone in EPA history since Gina McCarthy, the immediate past administrator, responded to more than 1,400 questions. And she actually responded to them completely, not evasively, not indirectly. She responded to them. And she needed more time given the volume of questions. And more time was granted so that she might more fully answer the questions that were raised. Just want to add that, if I could there, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, I come to the floor today to share with you and with our colleagues the reasons why I'm opposed to the nomination of Attorney General Scott Pruitt to be the EPA administrator. Over the last month, we've had a number of President Trump's nominees come before our committee and be debated right here on the Senate floor, as you know. We've had multiple confirmation hearings on a single day with members running to and from hearings trying to learn more about these nominees and get their important questions answered. So I understand if some of my colleagues with these back-to-back hearings have not yet delved into Scott Pruitt's record as deeply as we have on the Environment and Public Works Committee. And that's why we're here today. Mr. President, as ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, I, along with my colleagues on the committee, have scoured Mr. Pruitt's record to the best of our ability with the somewhat limited information the nominee has provided. We've sat through his nomination hearing where we asked him fundamental questions about his views on the role of the EPA and what he would do to protect our environment and public health. We submitted additional questions we had for the record and read through all of Mr. Pruitt's responses. We have done our due diligence with the information we've received, and I want to share with my colleagues and all of those watching exactly why, based on this review, I cannot support Mr. Pruitt's nomination. But first, I think it's important to revisit just why the EPA is still so critical. This agency was created 46 years ago by a Republican president named Richard Nixon with the support of a bipartisan Congress. They are tasked us with implementing our nation's, and tasked the EPA with implementing our nation's most important clean air, clean water, and safe chemical laws. The EPA is required to use sound science to protect both our environment and our public health. And by and large, the EPA has done this successfully, not perfectly, but successfully for decades, while our economy has continued to grow. Many people may not remember a time before the EPA, a time when states had to work individually to protect citizens in the communities in which they lived, a time before the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act were signed into law, a time when businesses operating throughout the U.S. were faced with a myriad of conflicting state and local laws affecting our health and environment. The choking smog and soot of a half-century ago seem unfathomable now. Rivers on fire and deadly toxic plumes sound like something almost from another world, impossible in our United States of America. Today, we have the luxury of largely forgetting these frightening circumstances, thanks to the efforts of the EPA and its employees, in partnership with state and local governments and with companies, businesses across America. In fact, the EPA and its many partners throughout this country have been so successful that it's easy for some of us to forget just why this agency is so critical. For some, it's easy to presume there's not much more for the agency to do. That could not be further from the truth. The environmental threats that we face today are real. They don't respect state boundaries. Over time, my state of Delaware has made great strides in cleaning up our own air pollution, but our work only goes so far. In Delaware, like many states on the East Coast, we sit at the end of what's known as America's tailpipe. 90% of the air pollution in Delaware comes from outside the first state, from power plants hundreds of miles away in places like Kentucky, Ohio, my native West Virginia, Indiana, and throughout the Midwest. As governor of Delaware, even if I had eliminated every source of air pollution within our state by stopping every combustion source and ordering every motor vehicle off of our roads, Delawareans would still have faced deadly doses of air pollution. Should Delaware residents really be forced to live with the consequences of decisions made by polluters hundreds or even thousands of miles from us? I don't think so. That's certainly not the golden rule as I know it. Fortunately, the EPA has recently implemented something called the Good Neighbor Rule to make sure that all states do their fair share to clean up our air. Every citizen in this country has a right to breathe clean air, regardless of where they live, and whether they live in a downwind state or an upwind state. That's why we have the EPA. You know, we've known for decades that most of the mercury in our fish come from air pollution that's emitted from the dirtiest coal plants and then settles in our waterways. We also know that mercury is a powerful neurotoxin that accumulates in the human body over time, threatening the health of this generation and generations to come. The EPA recently issued public health protections to clean up the toxic air pollution from our dirtiest coal plants, allowing families in the Danville, where I grew up alongside the Dan River, and thousands of other communities to once again eat the fish from our rivers, from our lakes, from our streams, without concern of mercury poisoning. That's why we have the EPA. Too often when states and local communities are pinched for cash, they try to save money by shortchanging clean air and clean water protections. Improvements to water infrastructure are often ignored. Corners are cut, and solutions are adopted that may save dollars now but inflict costly and unnecessary damage later. As we've seen most recently in the city of Flint, Michigan, these cuts can have a terrible and even tragic impact on the health of the most vulnerable in our society, especially on the youngest among them. Today, the citizens of Flint still lack clean drinking water, and a new generation in that city, which has been exposed to high levels of lead, face an uncertain future. That's why we have the EPA. And many people don't know it, but Delaware is the lowest lying state in our nation. The highest point in the state of Delaware is a bridge. Back home, the reality that our climate is changing is not up for debate. Families and businesses, owners face the stark realities of climate change almost every single day. Tackling that challenge is not just the right thing to do or what is best for Delaware's economy. It's a matter of survival. But our little state alone cannot stem the flow of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere that is largely causing our climate to change, our seas to rise, and our coastlines to retreat. Every state must do its fair share to safeguard our climate and their neighbors. That's why we have the EPA. Examples of air and water pollution produced by one state and fouling the air and water of others can still be found in too many parts of America, like the runoff from Pennsylvania that degrades the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, or the haze exported from other states that oftentimes shrouds the Smoky Mountains and degrades visibility at the Grand Canyon. That's why we have the EPA. Mr. President, throughout my years in the Senate and as a member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, I've had the opportunity to consider the credentials of 5 different nominees to serve as EPA Administrator, individuals put forth by both Democratic and Republican presidents. I've supported candidates in the past because they were able to clearly demonstrate their commitment. Candidates like former New Jersey Governor, Republican Governor Christine Whitman, former Utah Governor Mike Leavitt. I was proud to support them both and proud of their service in their role as head of EPA. But I've supported candidates like them because they clearly demonstrated their commitment to advancing the mission of the EPA, the mission to protect human health and to protect our environment. Never have I been forced to consider a candidate to lead the EPA who has been so focused throughout his career on crippling the agency he now seeks to lead, or so hostile to the basic protections that keep Americans and our environment safe. So with that, Mr. President, I'm going to close and come back many times in the hours to come as we continue the consideration of this candidate's worthiness. I thank you very much. I yield back my time.